Welcome everybody. My name is Shamsi Bryn. I work at arXiv. I do user experience there, and I am so delighted to be finally at this session, this wonderful session on universal designs for research with these fantastic panelists. Before we dive in, I just wanted to share a little bit of information about this session and set a few expectations, share the agenda. So one thing that I wanted to mention is that the chat, you might have noticed that the chat is mostly disabled. We're going to post a few links there in the beginning, but it's going to be quiet for the rest of the session because in Zoom, the chat is very noisy and disruptive for screen readers. But the Q&A tab is open and usable, and it doesn't have that problem. So please go ahead and use the Q&A tab as you're listening to these great presentations or questions come up for you. You can drop them right in there. And then towards the end of the session, we're going to have a Q&A period, and we will be going through all of the great questions that have come up. So please go ahead and freely use the Q&A tab. Something else that I wanted to mention is we just want to give a moment during this intro for any deaf participants in the audience to find and pin the ASL interpreters. There are 2 ASL interpreters who will be trading on and off. I wanted to share that we have volunteers in the background who are taking notes in just an open Google document, just a handy place to stay caught up or check on something you think you might have missed. And we're going to be sharing the link to that Google document in the chat. There is also a discussion board on the session website where that's a great place to have side conversations or to keep conversations going even after this session is over. Please feel free to use that discussion board. And we'll post a link to that in the chat as well. And then around pacing, we are going to be following a deliberate pacing and trying not to have a fire hose of information. That it's great for all of us. It gives us all an opportunity to listen and absorb and learn. It's really helpful when you have any kind of interpretation in your session, as we do here. And we'll also be fitting in 2 breaks in there as well. Those are the intros that I wanted to share about the session. Why don't we dive right into panelist introductions? And let's see, I wonder if Ashley, you would start us off.
Oh, sure. Hi, I'm really excited to be part of this session with arXiv. I'm honored to be here. I am an associate professor at Virginia Tech in Science, Technology, and Society. I'm a multiply disabled person, and I'm excited to be here alongside Kim and Devva. Devva's like a legend in disability studies, so I will pass it to her next because I am definitely outclassed and outmatched. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Devva.
Hi, I'm Devva.
And I'm most legendary. I am most legendary.
And the most legendary.
I'm most legendary on the dance floor.
On the next part.
The dance floor.
And on the dance floor is where I'm the most legendary.
Yeah. And my goal.
And my end goal.
Echo.
Is
Rachel.
Is Rachel.
She's a new Echo.
She's a new Echo.
We'll give her a pass.
We'll give her a pass.
Yeah. So when I stop, she starts,
So when I stop, she starts to talk.
and it's called reversing.
And what we're doing is called revoicing.
And it is part of ASL.
And it is part of the ASL.
It's part of personal assistance services.
It's part of personal assistant services.
But I took it out,
But I took it out
gave it a name,
and gave it a name,
which has seemed to have stuck.
which has seemed to have stuck
For what the skill is.
for what this skill is.
And I encourage you to learn to do it.
And I encourage you to learn to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Devva. Kim.
Hi, y'all. I'm also a little fangirly about being here right now. It's an interesting story of how I got to know Devva and Ashley. Maybe we'll get to that in the Q&A. I am someone who has been disabled her whole life, but I did not claim disability as an identity until about 3 years ago. And that happened while I was at Mozilla, who is my current employer. I was working in a completely different role. I am now, as of about a year ago, the product manager for accessibility, primarily focused on Mozilla Firefox, but also in other areas. And I'm also a student. Devva was a professor of mine at CUNY, which is how we met. So I'm getting a master's in disability studies. And this has been a journey, and I am really excited to share some of that journey with y'all today.
Well, thank you, everybody. So we are going to dive right into our first presentation, which is from Devva on disability models. And we are just so lucky, and I'm so excited to see what you have to share with us.
All right. So now, okay, that's the wrong file.
Give me 1 second. It is a long file.
It's the wrong file. Alright, so I have 2 screens.
I have 2 screens.
So I'm sharing the wrong screen.
And I'm sharing from the wrong screen.
So I may have to unshare.
Just allow me to unshare.
I'll, or take 2.
Okay, take 2.
Whoops. Help! What am I doing wrong?
Devva, would it be helpful if it looks like as host, I'm able to stop your sharing for you?
Yeah,
Would that be helpful?
yeah.
Okay, let me do that right now. Okay, so that stopped the sharing.
So now I have to share that button.
Right.
Then I take the oil and share it. And I hit share again. Okay, are you seeing a slide?
Yes, I'm seeing a slide that says how we understand disability models.
Okay, cool. Okay, all right, so here we go.
Here we go.
Read. Rachel, can you read this?
Rachel, can you read this? Yes, I can. I am not going to read these slides, nor will I ask anyone else to do so. I will flash my way through them too fast to read them. Read them at home. I have one simple message. Disability studies is not simple. Try to count how many models of disability I breeze through. Think past right and wrong. Each model serves a purpose for some inquiry. Please go home thinking this is more complicated than you realize.
Go on, next slide.
Goals of this project: to assert the inherent value of human difference, to create a model that enables us to recognize, map, and analyze disability, oppression in diverse cultures, to develop our model incorporating socio-political, cultural, ecological, and existential phenomenological theories of impairment disability, to create a procedural, temporal, spatial, and contextual model of impairment disability.
Okay, so before on definitions,
Okay, so before we go on,
before on definitions,
we're going to look on the definitions.
yeah, you can go back to this. Read it.
How we understand disability modules. Disability studies is a new field of study. Not everything about disability is disability studies. If it were disability studies, that would not be new. Models are how we talk about disability within disability studies. We can learn by the negative case, critique work on disability that is not disability studies. But we learn more by promoting fully flushed disability studies.
All right, now I'm gonna start to just flash these.
Now I'm just going to flash through these.
So the idea is there is just one
If any of you think that there's just one,
correct way
trust me.
of seeing this ability.
Of seeing these different disabilities.
It's not just one.
There's not just one.
We can start here.
Start here.
And go to there.
Then we go to here.
Then go to here.
And then over to here.
And then go to here.
And then over to here.
And note that I'm on this side.
Note that I'm on this slide.
My background
My background
is in cultural
is in cultural
and psychological
situational
and psychological
and psychoethical,
psychological
psychological,
geography
geography,
and anthropology.
and anthropology.
And I take an ecological view
And I take an ecological view
where context
where
is
context
privileged.
is privilege.
So that my preferred model.
So my preferred model.
And underneath here we are. Read this.
So theories of disability, rights versus justice-based theories. A rights approach has been our standard. A justice approach brings in ethics beyond rights to demand that justice actually be done after rights have been identified.
They got oomph.
It's the oomph.
The oomph that actually does something.
The oomph that actually does something.
All right. So now,
So now,
the moral to make it more complex.
now make it more complex.
Just in anthropology.
Let's add in anthropology.
Just in anthropology.
Just in anthropology.
Look at what we have.
Look what we have.
Ta-dum. 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 A whole lot.
A whole lot.
And here's a flash through
Here's a flash through
of my approach
of my approach
in graphics.
in graphics.
I love to draw.
I love to draw.
So here we are.
So here we are.
Now, study this at your leisure. You must study this at your leisure.
So study this at your leisure.
But look at how this really chronic illness and the job.
See how these disabilities are and handicaps are chronicled.
Look at how they are embedded
Look how they are embedded
in general approaches to what is real.
and in general to each other.
In general approaches.
In general approaches to each other.
What is real.
What is real?
And it goes on, and then underneath the approaches,
And then they go on to have underneath approaches.
we've added in actual actions.
Adding in actual items.
So these actions go under
So the actions go under
the aspect of thought.
the concept of thought.
Yeah. And the black box,
The boxes,
the black box
the black box
is where everything overlaps.
is where everything overlaps.
It is not transparent.
Not transparent.
It is a black box.
It is a black box.
And the goal is to understand the box.
The goal is to understand that box.
And this is a repeat of my intro.
This, going back to my intro,
I'll have Rachel read it again.
I'm going to have Rachel read it again. I am not going to read these slides nor will I ask anyone else to do so. I will flash my way through them too fast to read them. Read them at home. I have one simple message. Disability studies is not simple. Try to count how many models of disability I breeze through. Think past right and wrong. Each model serves a purpose for some inquiry. Please go home thinking this is more complicated than you realize. Think about how universal design can never really be universal or designed.
So universal design is a unattainable goal.
So universal design is an unattainable goal.
That's the way it was.
That's the way it is.
But so is the good life. But yeah, so is the good life.
So is the good life.
So go ahead and reach for that universal.
So go ahead and reach for the universal.
And be sure that it is designed.
Be sure that it is designed.
Because you have to have some order.
You have to have some errors.
Order.
And you have to have some order.
In order to think.
In order to think.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was marvelous, Devva. Thank you so much. I just want to add that we'll be posting a link in the chat to the section of the webpage where resources are, including the slide deck that Devva just shared, that folks can pore over, and take more time reading through those slides that she breezed through so quickly. We're going to take a little break now. We'll take a 5-minute break and see you folks soon for our next presentation. All right, we're going to regather. We're going to dive into the next part of our session. Ashley and Kim are going to present on actually conducting research with disabled people. Take it away, Ashley and Kim.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited. Kim is the one who put us in touch with arXiv after I met her on LinkedIn, then at a conference, and then running some research with disabled people together. So it's been a wild ride, and I'm really excited. Kim, please do pipe in. I'm going to start the slides. I know we'll end on some of your slides, but also you have a lot of knowledge in these areas too. So I really am excited about universal designs, and I hope you believe from Devva that designing universally, even if it's a fun goal that some designers really like, we're given the story of the universal design that, oh, we're going to include every body, every mind in in the designs that we make. That's not always possible. If you didn't quite catch that from Devva's work, and part of this has to do with sort of some historical context around disability. People have rightly pointed out that the universal design movement was started by non-disabled people about disabled people. So we have like a long history, and this is where I want to start in on the context. We just have a really long history where non-disabled people have been situated as the experts about disabled people. This permeates through into research today in a lot of different ways. Here on my slide, I'll image describe, there is an image from, I think it's the second eugenics conference in the United States, and it's a picture of like a tree that has the words eugenics across it. And the words eugenics is the self-direction of human evolution. It has all of these fields that may be near and dear to your heart, that include anatomy, biology, genetics, physiology, psychology, mental texting. These are the roots of eugenics: history, geology, anthropology, archaeology, ethnology, geography, statistics, law, politics, biography, economics, genealogy, sociology, religion, education, psychology, surgery, and medicine. These are the roots of eugenics. The people, this is a large scientific project in the first half of the 20th century. And it's a large, when people tell me they're doing interdisciplinary research, I'm often excited, but I'm often wary. Because I know what interdisciplinary research can also look like. And eugenics is one such problem. Eugenics, of course, is telling you is the self-direction of human evolution to the exclusion and elimination of disabled people. So a lot of laws and a lot of sort of the way in which things were set up socially for disabled people during this era is meant to move less desirable people. Some of that maps on to disability. Some of that maps on to sort of racist ideology in science as well, about who is fit to continue to be some of the genetic information that creates the next era of human beings. So from this, we get things at state fairs like Better Baby and Fitter Family competitions, for instance, where people would literally bring their families and babies to state fairs, just like you bring your cows and your tomatoes, to see who is which one of us has the best baby, which one of us has the best tomato. Okay, these things were contests that were seen as sort of a positive light. People would bring their genealogy charts to show how good their genetic information in their baby was, and babies would be measured and categorized. And we see in some of these things sort of the ways in which intelligence testing and things like BMI, measures that are still used today, were very much a project about sorting human beings, sometimes to the exclusion, often to the exclusion of disability, disabled people existing, particularly people with congenital disabilities, but not exclusively. So we see things like forced sterilizations. My state, the state of Virginia, I'm not far from where some of the, in terms of greatest number of sterilizations happened in this country, and the Supreme Court case in 1924 of Buck versus Bell, with the quote, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough." This has to do with the IQ testing here, and of course, the sterilization. That ruled that sterilization was, in fact, okay, and they could proceed with sterilizing a lot of people. This is Carrie Buck, who this is built on. And of course, Carrie Buck wasn't even disabled. She was just poor. So who ableism and eugenics target is not always just disabled people, but being poor, or often disability is used as sort of a stand-in for why. It's used as a justification for devaluing certain types of people across different things. And of course, in this time, we also see the proliferation of helping professions, right? The rehab movement is also spawning, and we need health professionals, especially for those who have been injured by polio or war, to be rehabilitated and put back into society to be made productive again. Otherwise, they're not a citizen we want, for instance. We also see this with longstanding religious narratives about disability. We see this with forced institutionalization of disabled people. We see all of this in non-disabled experts categorizing, sorting us, moving us around. And part of this relates to sort of the rise of fascism around some of these things as well. And of course, this is part of sort of a longer history, and it's one that I think about a lot in trying to communicate about disability, because so many times we understand disability as a product of where we are now, right? Or that we've come to some sort of great realization in terms of science and technology, where we know who the disabled people are, and we're going to help them with our technologies. But this is just recapitulating some other ideas that exist about disability that have a history to them, and I think are really important to know. I made this rough, like, eras of disability in the US. It doesn't map as well. Devva's already told us how these things are culturally situated, but these are the sort of situations in which I'm usually thinking about and sort of trying to trace different movements about disability, right? Some of them not led by disabled people, if we're talking about what the rehab movement and the era of eugenics and institutionalization meant, right? These are movements about disabled people, but they're not necessarily led by or appreciating that disabled people might have opinions about anything. And often disabled people are looked at as, you should help those people. And if you're going to be a good person, you can demonstrate your goodness on disabled people. I see so many engineers rush into projects where they know it's a good project because the goal is to help disabled people, and they haven't talked to any disabled people or any relevant disabled people. I'm an amputee, you can't tell because we're on Zoom, but I'm not going to walk for you. But indeed, we see often, in some of these spaces, people have thought about, well, this would be great for blind people. And occasionally, because I have a disability, they'll be like, don't you think this would be a great project for blind people? And I'm like, should we talk to some blind people? I don't magically know the minds of other disabled people just because I'm an amputee, right? I actually have to listen to other disabled people occasionally, and learn to listen to other disabled people more than non-disabled people. And I think that's really hard in the space of research, where so many disabled people have been excluded historically and seen as objects historically, and experience a lot to get through the pipelines of science and engineering if they're disabled. Like, we lose a lot of people along the way who are relevant to these discussions because of academic ableism. So I think about what it is just to train people to believe disabled people. Our institutions surely don't. I have to have a doctor, an MD, sign off on the fact that I need accommodations at work. He doesn't know what I do. Vaguely, he knows what I do. He doesn't know what this campus looks like in terms of mobility. He doesn't know the acoustic environment. I'm also hard of hearing. The acoustic environment in which I'm trying to work. When we're submitting my documentation, it's like, he's like, well, what do you want me to write for these things? Because he's a good doctor. He just doesn't write. She doesn't need anything. But we are disbelieved to get accommodations, but also disbelieved in a lot of research spaces. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. And when I'm talking about,
Ashley,
yeah,
Ashley, I'm going to chime in for just a hot second. You did a fantastic job of covering the most recent end of the eugenics movement. And I want to emphasize, because you did hit on this briefly, this is over 250 years old. The roots of it are in the 1700s. And this was something that I encountered in my very first week of grad school. And I was in a coffee shop reading my introductory text. And I started cussing when I hit that part. So the roots are very, very deep. So that's going to be important later on in this presentation.
No, and sometimes I'm asked if eugenics is over, which is that's funny. All of these movements never end. They make us Civil War wounded have died out by now. But I don't think rhetoric around disability and the amount amputees cost, that comes from the Civil War, and the sort of state governments that went bankrupt after the Civil War trying to afford disability technologies. I don't think that we're even out of that era in the United States. And certainly when we talk about Francis Galton coining the term eugenics and sort of the movement on from there, yeah, we see a lot of laws built in the early 1900s. A lot of them go along with Jim Crow. Right. And sort of the ugly laws were not just about keeping, and ugly laws, which I list here, a long list of hit you with everything. Ugly laws are laws, municipal laws, that allow people who are disabled and disfigured to be arrested for being seen in public. Right, that it wasn't appropriate, that it was offensive to moral sensibilities. And even the idea that if someone saw someone who was disfigured, it might cause a miscarriage were part of that. For public safety, people who did not look savory enough could have been arrested and removed. These are also used particularly around arresting and removing Black people, Indigenous people. It gives cops a reason to stop and ask a lot of questions of someone for why they're there if they don't look the way you want them to. So this gets sort of weaponized in the worst ways with these populations, but it also the underlying justification is around disability, and that you are dangerous to other people, but you're also dangerous to sort of the progeny that will produce as a human race. And I don't think we're out of the era of eugenics in any way, and that might come through as we're talking about these things, because I think a lot about including disabled people in research. My job for like 5 years, I had an NSF Career Award that let me just read memoir by disabled people and look for what they say about technology, and then think about it a lot. Thank you, the National Science Foundation. But sort of looking at stories disabled people are telling about technology often involves thinking about research in much more critical ways than I think most researchers are like ready to hear from disabled people. I think disabled people get dismissed or we're seen as representing very narrow views. When if you've read all of these memoirs and all these blog posts and all of these things that I have, this is not like a weird opinion for disabled people to have that maybe your research isn't as good as you think it is. Okay. And you research about disability, but you research about other things too. So here, I'm gonna move this. All right. Even the accommodations process, and I've mentioned this, is a risk to being included, right? If what we care about is including disabled people, you might go, hey, we already have the mechanisms. The Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. This is not a big deal. Disabled people can be in these spaces. They have some sort of legal apparatus for that. And well, that might be kind of true-ish. It's not true. It's not true in the sense that the ADA requires us to sue, and not everyone like has a lawyer on speed dial. And usually disability cases are hard won, not won, and seen as frivolous. Like the words frivolous ADA lawsuit come up a lot, and they're not frivolous. I'm always really happy when I hear about someone using the ADA to sue people, but the ADA didn't do everything it should have, and a lot of disabled people can't navigate it. Tanya Chiskowski talks about how disabled people are often asked to be made includable by changing who we are and how we appear to look less disabled in order to be included. This is something some accommodations processes sort of push us towards, but a lot of anti-ableism in the workplace means that we're aware of sort of structural factors that mean that how the world has been set up is unequal from a start. And it's more than checklists. I like checklists in terms of accessibility, but that's the basement. We're not even on the first floor at that point. And especially since so many of us have very different embodiments. And most disabled people are multiply disabled. And most research about disability, surprise, they want one type of disability represented. It means we get things like diabetic insulin monitors that don't have a voice readout. Do you know what a common complication of diabetes is? It's blindness, right? So having things that have visual readouts, you're already missing a large part of your population, right? So this has like real product related outcomes that mean that a lot of disabilities that are developed don't serve the population fully that they expect to, and leave out like multiply disabled people in really significant ways. So often when we think about disabled people in R&D, we have a couple different modes. And here I want to distinguish between designing for disability. There's a long history here, including the Universal Design Movement. I highly recommend the work of Amy Hamrai and Elizabeth Guffey for their work on the history of universal design and sort of why it doesn't do all the work that it could or should. There are lots of critiques of this approach, and a history of like imagining what it would be like to be disabled and then designing from that. Even though we know that disability simulation kind of gives people the wrong impression about what it's like to be disabled. There's good sociological work on that by Norio Redmond. She's great. And then, so the movement lately has been to talk about design with disability as promoted by disabled activists, and having disabled people make major decisions about technology. Of course, we still have pipeline issues. We have epistemic violence or injustices against many people in professional environments, if you even make it that far as a disabled person, through different levels of academic ableism along the way. And I like design with disability. I also realize that research isn't going to stop while we wait for enough disabled people to get degrees in engineering, and not every disabled person wants to get a degree in engineering. Already it is, we have to know a lot more about the ADA than anyone wants to, right? There's so many things that we just continue putting on disabled people. So I think about how we can engage disabled people in community ways, because of course, as an amputee, that doesn't mean I know anything about what it's like to be blind. So sort of like our selection of professionals can be somewhat limited. So I've been thinking about a lot of different ways, right and wrong, or problematic, or ambiguous. I don't think any of these is like, this is what we're going to do forever. But I've been thinking about disabled people in R&D in sort of different modes, particularly in thinking about cross-disability groups. I often sort of rally against sort of thinking about disabled people as test pilots and human subjects. Human subjects, this is a word from IRB. If you're doing institutional review board sort of ethics protocols for using human subjects, often if you're looking at a group of disabled people and you're putting it through IRB, you're talking about them as human subjects. And often this means that everyone's data is anonymized. It means that disabled people who contribute to the project as human subjects don't get celebrated in the literature in any way. Even when they make, and they don't monetarily benefit to the degree that we would expect. Test pilots are people, and I see this, of course, in the amputee world a lot, who, oh, you have a new technology. We would like 3 below the knee amputees with limbs of at least 3 inches to try a new socket design, right? So we're very much narrowing our field of who could be a test pilot, but then talking about these people as, and sometimes as contributing to the project, but really as sort of human test pilots, right? This comes from aviation. Here's a pilot who knows how to do a lot of things. We're going to put them in to test this particular aircraft. The same happens with disability technologies, and disability technologies are often talked about, especially when we talk about fancy prostheses and exoskeletons. We talk about these projects as first disabled people will be using them, and then everyone else will be. So as sort of disabled people being useful for their contribution in helping all of these other people, but we're never going to name who they were. And they don't get celebrated or known, and we're not going to pay them very well. Oh, you can have an extra foot. That's my amputee friends who are test pilots. Oh, you get some free gear, right, at the end of it. And it might not be the compensation that you deserve for that kind of thing, right? So being asked to offer labor for free, but then also being anonymized, and any contributing data, any ways you shape the project aren't really celebrated or known. And we have a long history of celebrating non-disabled people working on and with disabled people without the disabled people being like recognized. So you're perpetuating a particular type of historical harm towards disabled people being recognized and valued for their expertise. I think about the way a lot of people move from this is like, oh, we recognize individuals might not be it. If we had focus groups to talk about the technology, this is a way a lot of people, particularly in engineering that I speak to, is like, oh, we'll get a focus group about the technology. If this, like, well, you do this, and then we'll have a focus group. And it's a way of trying to include more people in a discussion about a technology, but it's often with very limited questions, and the project parameters are already understood and laid out, so it's not at an early enough stage, like the product's already coming, or something has already been designed without disabled feedback that is now being, sort of created in the mix. I've been thinking about participatory research, so this is something particularly talked about for different minoritized populations, especially around like health disparity. Like, we need to be able to actually research with the goals that community has. This is less employed around disability, but you see it around particularly indigenous populations and tribal groups actually having more say about what research gets done or doesn't with their group. And then people who also are doing more outreach-oriented technological projects that seek community agreement, consensus, understanding, and sort of sometimes help from those community partners in developing different things. I've been thinking of consulting models. I don't know if I count them as participatory research or not. This is something my group ends up talking about quite a bit. But the consulting model is one that we, and this is what I've done with Kim, have funding for disabled people. We get to pay them like consultants to advise on a wide variety of tech projects. So I'll recruit the people from my Appalachian community. If you bring the research and tell us about it, and hear from disabled people and we really enjoy talking amongst ourselves about technology. So I enjoy the conversations that are created between different multiply disabled people about how they might imagine a technology or where they wouldn't like to see it go. Those are, I think, really important conversations to have. So we call this Disability Community Technology Center. So we talk about disability forward consulting at Discotech. And so here is one session that we have. So many projects are done to help disabled people without consulting us. So so here, the image is of, you can see my foot, the meat one in the picture, with my graduate student and two of our testers, two of our consultants, and then another graduate student. One of them has on VR, AR goggles, and they are walking through a construction site in their VR goggles, because we're talking about construction technologies that might be useful, that could keep more disabled people in the construction workforce, for instance. And so we've had a couple of different runs. I think we've done 5 so far, and it's not human subjects research. We have everyone use their name, and if they don't want to use their name, we ask them for an alias. We thank them in the literature when we write papers, and we ask if they want to be like acknowledged for for quotes that they said, or if they'd like to be like somewhat anonymous or thanked in the end, or they can run it all anonymously and we won't mention their name and we'll say, and additional anonymous consultants. So there's sort of a wide gamut there. There's 2 of our consultants looking at a robot dog. We get excellent, like there's been a lot of surprise in this. We get really excellent questions. There's a huge focus on mental health concerns, even when we don't have anyone in the group who says, I have a mental health disability. We almost always end up talking about mental health and thinking about like what technologies sound like, what they're like to like feel through and think through. There's a lot of talk about integration and standardization with like existing technologies like voice to text. Like, why are you using some voice to text that disabled people don't already use if you're looking for a voice to text program to go along with directions for whatever bot or gadget you are working on? We've also, here's us having fun, same lab. This is the arcade lab, and one of my colleagues, Kara Shefsari, who's one of the co-PIs in the Mellon with me. We run into problems. You can see in this image, we were doing, we were consulting. We had a group of 9 people, 4 of which were wheelchair users. You can't see the numbers there. And you can see me and my graduate students bringing a ramp so that they could get into the room where the technology they were going to hear about and see the setup for was, because this whole lab is built for no good reason on a 4-inch platform. And our university would not put a ramp in for us on that day. They gave us a list of people we could contact 45 minutes away, because we don't live in a big city, if we wanted to rent a ramp and go pick it up and bring it back. And luckily I own a ramp, so I just brought it. You can see we run into maintenance of elevators. Getting our people to these spaces also highlights the fact that a lot of research is done in spaces that are really inaccessible. So it's sort of this demonstration to researchers. This is just a side effect of us coming up to see your particular lab or your project, is that you couldn't even have a grad student with disabilities in your lab. So we think about this as highlighting a pipeline problem as a side effect of bringing disabled people in to consult on these projects. Oh, Kim, do you want to say something about the Firefox work?
Yeah. Yes, I will try to keep it brief because I know we're running a little bit long. In July of this year, we consulted with 7 folks from Discotech. I think, Ashley, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the first virtual test that we ran with your group. You hadn't done one, you'd done them all in person. So what was interesting about that is we had people who were joining by themselves or in small groups. One group was on the University of Virginia Tech campus, and the other was at UNCC Charlotte. And we were all remote looking at a prototype for a new Firefox feature for profile management. So our goal, we had a very specific script, but we were trying to find out whether disabled folks could successfully complete all the tasks to set up and use this new feature, what disabled folks liked or didn't like about it, where we needed to improve it. And then this was the most important, what we didn't know, we didn't know. Ashley hinted at this earlier, like the questions are great and the ideas are great. And we got a ton of unplanned bonuses. We were just focused on the desktop, but we got insights during that session that will directly inform our mobile work, which was already planned in 2025. We also got a couple of new ideas for new Firefox features and potentially ones that all of our customers might just love, not just our accessibility customers. 5 accessibility areas where we should be improving across all Mozilla projects and products such as like font and iconography sizing. And in general, it leveled up our R&D practices. This is the first group of consultants who were disabled that we have ever worked with. And I think it was literally a mental game changer for our researchers and designers because they went in with their script and because they basically had ringers in the room. So people acting as bridges between the non-disabled and the disabled groups. I'm one of them. I'm disabled, but I was wearing both hats. I think Ashley was in the same bucket, and then there was another PII in another space who was doing the same. Having that ringer in the room will help you uncover more insights. We've got an example playbook of how we could test remotely and with a group of disabled folks. And in general, it just overall improved the skill set and the experience of our in-house designers and researchers. And that will allow them to start educating and coaching their colleagues as they continue to learn.
No, and we got some great feedback. They didn't like the scripting as much, right? They pushed back. Like, we want to go ahead and see this part because our consultants take themselves seriously. They're getting paid consultant rates to offer their advice and opinions. It's not as if they have to listen or go in a linear fashion. They're the consultant. They can ask for different information. They are and great at talking amongst themselves about what they'd want and what they would prioritize, and discussing sort of access friction and tension between different disabled users too. I think it's rare to get that kind of richness, especially in the way we usually proceed with disability research. It makes me really excited. And I like every session, they say a whole bunch of things that I don't anticipate, which is really fun for me and my graduate students, and Damien, who's at UNC Charlotte, who's one of our collaborators, Damien Williams, to sort of sort out and write up for ourselves later. We like it a lot. So thank you for participating in that. So yeah, we care about valuing disabled expertise, and Kim's already pointed to a whole bunch of this, but it's not just about tolerating disabled people or accommodating them or assimilating them to being more disabled or some environment. Disabled people have sort of unique ways of thinking, working, adapting to particular systems, ways we like information organized. We can talk about things like deaf gain versus hearing loss. In the way the deaf community does. We can talk about neurodiversity as being a value add in a lot of spaces. But valuing disability means often you're challenging sort of compulsory able-bodiedness, trying to make disabled people as abled as possible in order to be able to function, work, and be in public and enjoy the same things everyone else does. And we really enjoy the exchange in community and strength and knowledge, working across disability groups and coming to new understandings for all of us in a lot of the conversations. It's also fun as a community building activity because often disabled people are discouraged from fraternizing with other disabled people. So many of our accommodations processes and doctor's appointments mean that we're segregated from each other, discouraged from interacting. I have been in prosthetic clinic waiting rooms that are silent, which I go to a prosthetist who has a whole bunch of couches in his waiting room now, and we all hang out together before our appointments. It's a very different vibe than any other prosthetic clinic I've been in. But the sort of forced aloneness means that it's hard even for disabled people to fully value disability because they don't see strong reflections of other fun and opinionated disabled people in the room with them. We can positively, and here's a picture of Atlas Shepard and Laura Lawson doing really cool wheelchair dancing. When we value disability, we end up changing how we do things all together. and enjoy creativity and beauty in sort of new registers. So this guiding principles toolbox, Kim actually can summarize things instead of me just like, look at all this history and waving my hands frantically. Kim.
Yeah, this is, I'm going to take a pause for just a half a second. We just dumped a Niagara Falls of information on you between Devva and Ashley and me. So the question I get most often asked in my role is, how do I even get started? Like once people start to comprehend how hard and how vast this is, it's just, you have this moment of overwhelm. So I want to acknowledge that there's maybe some overwhelm right now. So this is not a hard and fast set of checkboxes or practices. This is more like guiding principles, how you might get started. The first that I want to highlight is getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. There was a study by Findler and others in 2007, has a horribly long title, the Multidimensional Attitude Scale Towards Persons with Disabilities, or MAS. And it described a then new method developed by those authors to measure how individuals think and act and feel about disabled people. The most common emotions, and this study has been replicated in other countries throughout the world since, the most common emotions are discomfort and stress. You are not going to overcome 250 plus years of eugenics and social stigma in a single day or a year or even your lifetime. If you reach a point where you're 100% comfortable, then you're missing some information. The second area is to go specific and broad, and Ashley hinted at this earlier. If all of your research focuses on chasing a specific idea or a specific solution, you're going to miss out on a ton of other discoveries. Look for opportunities to apply a specific solution, but also be a polymath. You're going to encounter rabbit holes, and I'm encouraging you to go down them. It is the difference between a solution that is compliant, which again, actually love that it's the basement, right? It's the basement. Compliance is the basement. You have the opportunity to develop something or discover something that is delightful or transformative. I gave the earlier example of the Firefox profiles team. We got a delightful new idea for a text to voice feature because we chased down a side comment in our Disco text session. Third area, trade expertise. This ties back to the way that Discotex centers disabled folks as consultants, and you, in your own area of expertise, need to share that expertise with your consultants. I will give you a personal example. Accommodations are highly personal if you haven't figured that out from what we've shared so far. I belong to an adaptive rowing club. 3 of us in this club are visually impaired, and none of us need the same solutions. On any given day, the solutions are a mix of I always need this, I sometimes need this, and sometimes it's a brand new thing that we make up on the fly. We co-hack all these solutions with our fellow disabled rowing teammates, but also with our rowing coaches who have the domain knowledge to help us bridge those two things together. So trade your expertise. Learn in public. Encourage questions, especially in forums where there are many folks and people have time to think a bit before responding. The best example I have of this in my workplace is I get a lot of Slack DMs. My coworkers are worried about saying the wrong thing or appearing ignorant when it comes to disability and accessibility. But I turn around and ask them to ask that question in our public accessibility channel. We have a favorite phrase: when you ask in public, everyone learns. Nobody can possibly know everything about disability and accessibility. It is literally as vast as the human experience. Ask in public, everybody learns. The last thing is to do what you can with what you've got where you are. This is a quote from a fellow Appalachian. I'm Appalachian and proud of it. Squire Bill Widener, who was based in Virginia. I'm encouraging y'all to dive in. You are going to mess up. You are going to chase dead ends. You are going to share the wrong expertise. You are going to learn things that are possibly not helpful right now. But trying anything is better than doing nothing. Be brave, take that first step, dive in.
Oh, thank you is the last slide. I really appreciate those comments, Kim. I'm going to stop share so that I can see other things on my screen.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. We've actually reached our second and last break, so we're going to take a brief break, and I invite all the attendees, as questions are coming up for you, to use the Q&A tab to share those questions. After the break, we're going to dive into a little panel discussion and then Q&A. So see everybody in 5 minutes. I hope it's been 5 minutes. I don't always accurately watch the clock. We might be at 4.5. But welcome back, everybody. We're now going to shift into a panel discussion. We have a mix of questions here. We're going to start out with a question for each person that I'm going to ask the same question of the 3 panelists. That question is, and why don't we start with Kim, if that's okay? What is one of your favorite examples of a creative accessibility hack, whether alone or as part of a community? And what do you love about that story?
Yeah, I will share. I mentioned I was in an adaptive rowing group. I have a teammate, Sarah, who has mobility conditions, and we co-hacked a solution. The entire group co-hacked a solution for her because she's short, but she also has limited range of movement, and she was having problems rowing a full, to her degree, stroke. We literally took painter's tape and a stack of pads to put on the seat, and we strapped painter's tape, these pads on top of the seat, and we just kept ripping off the painter's tape and changing the height of the pads until we hit the exact right combo. And it took time. What's interesting about this is group hack. It was not a solution that was the immediate right solution. We even changed the density of the pads, and it was a whole thing. And that went on for 2 months until we hit the exact right solution. And then the very next week, it needed to change again because she's got a variable condition. So it's also a good example of that reference that I said earlier about the solutions that you have for accessibility are highly personal. There's some things that you're going to use all the time, some things that you use sometimes, and then there's things that will change over time. You'll need to create new from scratch.
Thanks for sharing that. Devva, could we turn to you next for your favorite example of a creative accessibility hack and why you love sharing that example?
See action items. All right. So we're okay. So let's vote on approving the agenda.
I guess my favorite hack
I guess my favorite hack
is slowing the whole thing down.
It's
Slowing down.
slowing the whole thing down.
Slowing the whole thing down. Go slow.
Go slow.
Antoinette already voted yes. Danielle said yes. Janice, you said yes. So we have Judy.
That's brilliant. Brilliant and simple. Thank you.
Steve.
Devva, does anything come to mind with the second part of this question, which is why do you love sharing this accessibility hack?
If I don't
If I don't
enjoy sharing,
enjoy sharing,
don't get what they need.
then people don't get what they need.
I don't get.
I don't get what I need.
Francis? Yes. Jesse?
Yes.
Sometimes
I sometimes
suffer from being too transparent,
Yes. All right.
suffer from being too transparent,
but it's worth it.
but it's worth it.
It's from June 14th, 2024. Do we have any
Thank you for sharing that, Devva. Ashley, how about you? Do you have a favorite creative accessibility hack, and why do you love sharing that story?
I don't know if it's a creative accessibility hack. A lot of people are really hesitant to use existing disability technology, sometimes because it's made really ugly or they associate it with being old, right? Disabled people can be ableist. And it can also keep us from using great things like shower stools. The number of times I don't given permission to people to use shower stools, like I have to, I'm an amputee, right? I'm not showering on one leg and cracking my head open and acquiring more disabilities. I am using a shower stool, and I think it's one of the best technologies for disability that exists. And it's one that people who are chronically ill should be using, right? Because you also might get lightheaded, or if you have POTS or things like that, being in warm, humid environments can be a real problem for you. So the number of times I've said, you could sit down when you shower to other people. And from the amputee world, I know we talk about butt showers, which is where you sit on your butt in a shower and take a shower. I love that we have that term for it in the amputee world. Like, you don't need a shower chair to sit down to shower. It's nice, but it's not terrible to do otherwise. And certainly, if you're traveling, I think about like all of the ways we discuss how to shower when you travel in the amputee world. Butt showers are much better than people give them credit for, and safer too. So I just think about how we trade in what we do in our daily lives to inhabit the world that we inhabit that is often really tricky to get around in. And I love those sort of, like, it's not a new technology, it's not anything radical, but so many people resist using perfectly good technologies that really would save them a lot of hassle.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. I have another question here that I would love to hear from all three panelists on, which is directly relates to the complexity that both presentations touched on, that there's no one right solution. And this question is around directly conflicting accommodations. Are there examples that you can share with us to help us understand sometimes, like, how these complexities can emerge? And does anybody want to just raise their hand when something comes to mind? We could do it that way. Oh, I see Ashley's hand.
I mean, I can think of one that gets talked about as a universal design, but it's not a universal design. So the tactile pavers on your curb cuts that exist so blind people don't walk into the road. Like, it indicates, oh, here we go, a crosswalk is coming, right? So this might be the safe point at which to cross, and it's giving this tactile information. I don't know if you've ever used that with a walker or a cane or a prosthetic leg where you can't feel the bottom of your foot. So it's going to be a rough go, or using double crutches to get on and off a curb cut like that. It's not better. It is a conflicting access point, even though it is good, compliant disability design to do so. I think that's a really important, like, you're never going to come up with a perfect solution because our embodiments are so different. And it's one of those things that even though it's written into like building codes and things, it isn't, and it is the accessible thing to do. That doesn't mean it's more accessible. It's actually less accessible for a lot of people to navigate this. But it goes with sort of a majority of disabled people. It doesn't harm them in the same way, or the harms aren't as extreme. But I mean, I know people who can't use tactile pavement at all. And it doesn't mean that all of us can use the same route. And that can, like, getting comfortable with that is really important, I think. Yeah, Kim, sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to pile onto that because we were trying to hack a solution last rowing season that involved putting an edge on our dock so that our blind and low vision participants wouldn't walk off the dock into the water by accident, but also would allow our wheelchair users and others who need to get into their boats by sitting on the dock first. Like, couldn't get in the way of that either. We could not come up with an accessible solution for everybody. And we did think about the tactile docks. This dovetails with another phrase that I think we shared this in advance. There is someone that that is in the disability community and the activist community and accessibility community, and I'm blanking on their name right now, but they shared this wonderful concept several years ago called Schrodinger's ally cat. And it is a complex joke, so bear with me. So ally is A11Y. It's a numeronym. It's a shortening of accessibility. There are 11 letters in between the A and the Y in the word accessibility. And so sometimes in the tech community that gets expressed as A11Y, and it said ally. She was explicitly describing a situation where you do your very best to make an accessible tech product, you ship it, and as soon as you ship it, that's when you find out who it was not accessible for. You did your very best to be accessible, but you will not know. Literally, it's based on Schrodinger's cat, the physicist who had the thought experiment of a cat in a box, and you didn't know if the cat was alive or dead until you opened the box. You will not know until you ship the code whether that code was accessible or not.
Thanks for that example. Devva, I'm wondering if anything comes to mind for you when you think about conflicting solutions.
Read the chat. Read the
Things
chat.
that came to my mind that Devva has prompted here for us is people who need some low light and others who need it to be very bright, or people who need to be allowed to interrupt a story and others who need to not be interrupted.
Thank you for sharing those. Yeah. We have another question that is very high level, and let's ask each person in turn as well, which is, what do you wish non-disabled folks understood about accessibility? Maybe we could start with you, Devva, but of course, if I call on you, please let me know if you need like an extra minute to think about things. What do you wish non-disabled folks understood about accessibility? Or you're still on mute.
That they need to learn.
That they need to learn.
If you don't know you're expected to learn,
If you don't know, then you have that you need to learn, then you don't know.
Yeah.
I love that position of humility. Seems very foundational. What about you, Ashley? Does anything come to mind for you when you think about what you would like people to understand?
I wish people would stop making disability weird. I mean, I like disability being weird for good reasons, but I think some people overblow the difference of disabled people to them. Like, disabled people are still regular people. Disability is a natural part of human existence, and I think a lot of times people go in with a mindset that they have to be these over-helping helpers, which is dehumanizing in its own way, to be seen as an object all the time. And I wish people would just, treat disabled people like disabled people, and people that or treat disabled people like people. And that means also like ask us what we want and need and value that we're there in the way that you do with your other colleagues. Sometimes what we need will be a little bit different, but that doesn't fundamentally change that we're people in the environment with you.
Thank you so much.
Bridging those two ideas, I wish that we didn't have to tell highly personal stories to get traction on making something accessible. It is astounding to me from a business perspective, just purely on a business perspective. The CDC just updated its statistics year over year. We have increased almost 2% in terms of percentage of the population that has disabilities. And we know that that number is undercounted because it requires people to self-identify. There are highly specific definitions of disability in that count. And it's currently at 28.7%. In any other context, if you told a business that you had the ability to reach an additional 28.7% of a market, they would be all over that. The thing that I have realized gets the most traction recently, and it depends on where you are as an organization in terms of your level of maturity, is telling personal stories, because then they know somebody that this personally impacts.
Thank you for sharing that. On this sort of issue that you just mentioned, within business and what gains traction, there's an audience question that's come in that asks, how can we successfully integrate these principles? And they're asking specifically about health services, though it seems like a more universal question, into health services research when the focus seems to be so heavily on what it will cost. Do you have any thoughts on when this question about cost and who pays for it, who can afford it, comes up? Any thoughts you'd like to share with the audience? Please jump in or raise your hand if something comes up that you'd like to share.
That is a super complex question. I'm just going to preface with that, and then I'm going to let other people talk because I need to think about it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in, and I think there's two things here. I will say most accommodations, if we're talking about accommodating people in the workplace, right? Cost, like there have been studies done, cost under $500 a year, right? So if you're talking about maintaining an employee on the job who's disabled, it's not going to cost as much as you think generally. And the cost of not having them is probably higher, although that's harder to quantify in the studies that they have done. We also know that retrofitting and making those accommodations and changing things to address more people is a lot harder on the flip side. When you're forced to bring things into compliance, it often costs a lot more money than making things compliant, making things accessible, making things inclusive to begin with. And compliance, of course, is the sort of basement level here. But if you want to actually design good things that suit a lot of users, the retrofit approach is not it. And it makes disabled consumers feel like second-class citizens if what they have to ask for is retrofit. So you're also alienating your consumers. If they can't use the device and then you make some sort of workaround, it's like when Apple rolled out the health tracking without period information to track, right? You're missing out on 50% of your population by not designing with the thought that women might use your device or menstruators might use your device. It cuts both ways there, but it's just bad product design. It's not like building things uninclusively is just bad product design. And Kim gets to it with the statistics a lot better there, but yeah.
Yeah, please feel free to jump in at any time if you have a thought about how to approach this question of costs, who bears the cost, and how we should think about that. We could also add some other questions into the mix. Oh,
Shamsi, Devva's added an answer in the chat.
Oh, thank you, Devva.
No, yeah.
The most difficult accommodation to get is one that requires behavior change instead of just throwing money around to fix it.
Buy you X, Y, and Z.
I'm gonna buy you X, Y, and Z.
That won't change my day.
So
It won't change or make what I need.
Yeah.
Need to do some research and find.
So from that perspective, the cost question is maybe the lower barrier.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I just noticed the time. Why don't we move on to, I really want to end with an opportunity for closing thoughts from each of our panelists. And I don't want to put anyone on the spot again, so please jump in, give it a thought, give it a moment, and jump in when you have a closing thought you'd like to share with the audience.
Devva, you're off mute. Do you want to go first?
Yeah. we have so much more in common
We all have so much more in common
than we have in difference,
than we have in different.
even though we need different accommodations.
Even though we need different accommodations,
The
process
of accommodation
of accommodation
is the same.
is the same.
Thank you, Devva.
I will chime in and say I am a polymath, and accepting and claiming disability as an identity, I'm sometimes asked if that makes it easier for me. It doesn't make it easier. It makes my life better. I have more friends. I have more support networks and co-hacking. And it also is helping me realize this is a lifelong pursuit. Like Polymath Me is delighted that I have a lifelong learning opportunity. And so if you're feeling overwhelmed, I am encouraging you to lean into the, isn't it awesome that there is something this complex that you get to work on and actually help improve?
Thank you for that, Kim. Ashley.
We make the world accessible for non-disabled people all the time. One thing that strikes me when we ask about the cost of including disabled people is no one blinks at the cost of including disabled people. It's just done by default. And it wears me down sometimes that disabled considerations are always thought as an add-on and never part of the entire process. And it is dehumanizing to never be thought of as part of the default that matters, as part of the group that matters, and to always be cast as expensive or unnecessary to design for. Yeah. Thank you. I'm not great. I have chemo brain. We are 90 minutes in. I have no more thoughts, only head empty. No thoughts, head empty. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Thank you, everybody. We are at time. I'll just end with a real heartfelt thank you on behalf of arXiv for our panelists and also all the volunteers in the background and our interpreters. And it was such a pleasure working on this session together and hosting it. And you've given us all so much to think about. I'll only speak for myself, but I'm glad that you gave me permission to acknowledge that feeling of overwhelm, because I've got that. And yeah, I'll be thinking about this a lot. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.